Welcome to the next episode of the Simplify Consulting podcast, where we will look to understand the importance that data storage holds within the wealth landscape and the challenges to provide green data storage solutions in the future. My name's Chris Lamb, wealth consultant at Simplify Consulting, and I'm also joined by my colleagues Tom Cassidy, Richard Sherwood, and our director Carl Woodward. It's really important to understand how we used to manage data, what we do now, and how it might look in the future as well. So I'm just going to hand over to my colleague Tom to share your thoughts on this.
Thanks, Chris. So yeah, as we all know, the wealth and finance industry have a large and rapidly growing data footprint currently, and a lot's really been written in this space around companies' ESG propositions and their CSR commitments. But I haven't seen a lot written around the way in which we use and manage our data in the industry. And in particular, the cloud's environmental impact as a result of this. We used to see large data, on-site data storage taking up large amounts of real estate, and this wasn't ever necessarily environmentally friendly or cost-effective. But we're almost seeing this new global transition towards cloud computing, with large amounts of people using cloud services on a daily basis, and wealth and finance companies being a real part of this mass expansion. I think there's going to be a need for wealth and finance companies to be more conscious than ever, around the way in which they contribute to the increase of this data storage usage across the industry, and especially, how and where they store their data.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? I think the consequential impacts of collecting lots of MI and information about customers, about behaviours, to help inform things like artificial intelligence and analytics that drive them, sales behaviour and targeting. And it's really interesting that, and conversely, then kind of the impacts of GDPR on what you can hold and how much permission you've got to hold it. But overall, I guess what we're looking at is a market where the amount of data that's being collected, stored, and used is growing exponentially, and therefore at some point down the line there's that alignment between the amount of data you've got in a cloud and the amount of data that has to actually sit somewhere physically on disks and on storage devices somewhere in the world, and that inevitably means that the footprint of those data centers, wherever they might be, and the resilience that they now need is increasing as well. So it's a really relevant discussion topic, isn't it, particularly at this time, I think, with a big focus on ESG, as you say.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for that, Tom and Carl there. Moving on to yourself, Rich. I mean, what additional benefits do you think cloud storage would bring over the traditional on-site or hard storage, which Carl alluded to there?
So there's many benefits, and some of them are just general tech benefits. Some of them are sort of more specific to wealth. So just some general sort of tech benefits is just you've got the scalability of cloud storage. So you've sort of got your three main players in cloud, which is Amazon or AWS, Microsoft, and Google. One of those three companies have a finger in some sort of cloud storage that you're looking to use, I imagine. And it's just the scalability and the ability to just increase your storage space literally within hours is completely invaluable to companies if data is key. And go back to a few years ago, that would be a case of someone going to an office somewhere in the country, plugging in some new hard drives, all that sort of stuff, as where it's now just automatic, it just happens. And there's so much value in that in itself. Another benefit is the fact it is on the cloud, and you're paying these sort of mega corporations for the resilience of that data. So if that server goes down or if it goes missing or anything like that, you as the customer shouldn't ever notice. So that they should have procedures and policies in place to protect it, have it backed up in multiple locations around the world, so your business can carry on running regardless of what's actually happened to your original data, as it were, because it's not a concern for you. And of course, the last one is just the fact it is on the cloud and it is accessed via the internet, which obviously is doable with local servers as well, but that has its own complexities. By using cloud, cloud services, whether it's a program, a data storage, whatever it is, it's just so easy to gain access to.
And Rich, the fact that there's, as you say, there's 3 pretty sizable organizations, household names now actually, for a number of reasons, not just kind of data storage and cloud services, but the fact that there's 3, do you think that's a risk to financial services companies in particular, to kind of customers generally? Do you think that's a good thing because they're so big and there's so much focus on resilience, and those companies really can't fail now, can they? Or do you think actually there's greater risk because it's concentrated in such a small number?
I think it works both ways. So yeah, these companies are so big now, and there's just, like I said, there's so much trust in them not to fail that it's pretty much guaranteed they're not going to. However, on the flip side of that, there's always an underlying problem with a monopoly or duopoly or triopoly in this case of even the most basic things like prices, access, that sort of thing. If these companies want to turn around and go, actually, we don't want you as a customer anymore, and all 3 of them did it, then you've got issues. There are sort of up and coming firms. So China's in the process of building a massive data storage site in their country, which will have its own competitor. And there's a few other smaller ones, but they, like you said, there's definitely those main 3. Directly, I don't see that being a problem. Because the market isn't closed and anyone can technically start one up. But it's the same as anything when you've got mega corporations doing it. No matter how far up you got that line, you'll probably end up at one of those 3 anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And Carl, in terms of the cost element to the end user for this storage, obviously you mentioned there that there are the 3 main competitors. Do you feel, obviously, and Rich mentioned around China growing in this space as well, do you think more is needed in this space to keep prices competitive for firms?
Yeah, I don't know really. I mean, that's the kind of the consequence of having 3 pretty big hitters dominating the marketplace. I mean, I don't know. I think maybe the Competition and Markets Authority may have a perspective on it. But obviously, when you've got 3 competing, you can then, hopefully enable their clients to compete on price, and there'll be some negotiation. I think that's quite healthy. If there was only one dominant player, you'd be particularly concerned about market dynamics. I think from a customer perspective, and coming back to kind of Tom's point earlier on, I'm not sure there's the visibility of this anyway. I'm not sure there's any sense that cost of infrastructure historically, or now data centers and cloud computing, is factored into the overall price of a product or a service, whether that's an advisor charge or a platform fee or whatever it might be in kind of the wealth world. I'm not sure. I think most customers are fairly ambivalent and kind of agnostic as to what that charge actually is, and probably don't see any transparency in the way pricing is done to be concerned about it. But I think if you were to compare, and it'd be interesting to do a piece of analysis to say historically, and still many companies have their own data centers in their own building, which they maintain the infrastructure of the servers, the hardware, they're patching them, they're upgrading them, they're cooling them all the time, all those good things. But what does that cost versus what it costs today to effectively outsource that to someone else and take away that headache? I don't know what that comparison really is in reality, and that might be something interesting to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a really interesting point there. And in terms of obviously cost benefit realization here as well, and particularly the benefits for, when I say the end user, it's the actual person accessing these services on the cloud. Tom, I don't know if you can share a couple of thoughts around what benefits that might bring. So, for example, if I work in an operational area, what's the benefits of having cloud storage and accessing the cloud?
I think since the world of COVID and more and more operations teams having departments which are working from home and more remote working, I feel like cloud computing has really come into its own in recent years. Allowing that accessibility, ease of data to be spread between different teams and different departments quickly. This has obviously helped operations teams up and down all around the industry with coping with things like COVID. in terms of going back to Carl's point earlier around having from a consumer's point of view, I think the key thing that I wanted to mention was around sustainability and, these underlying emissions associated with data centers and, large wealth and finance firms offering, numerous ESG propositions and CSR commitments, and their customers being very aware of these. But are they really aware of the data impacts the company's producing? And, I think it really makes you ask that question around, can companies be trusted who are offering these large CSR commitments and offering all these ESG propositions? Can they be trusted if their own house isn't really in order?
I think that's a really interesting point, isn't it? And probably a hidden element of kind of the green agenda, the focus on kind of CO2 emissions, all those good things. Evidently, the more data you hold, the more energy you're using, the more costly it is, and the bigger the impact ultimately to the environment. I'm not sure that has really come to the forefront yet of the market, the industry, that consideration of actually, do we need to store all this data? There's this trade-off now, as we said at the outset of the call, around, companies that are the best informed and able to respond really, really quickly to customer behavior and customer demand are probably those customers that are utilizing data the most and trying to analyze it and orchestrate it and use it in whichever mechanism, data warehouse or whatever that they want to use it in. But the consequential impact of that is they're actually storing more data and using more energy. They're driving more cooling to reduce the impact of heating or the physical infrastructure that's required. So I don't know, at some point that's going to come to the fore and will be a factor in companies thinking about their ESG and their footprint of the impact on the environment beyond just your traditional kind of considerations, I think.
Yeah, I think that's a really sort of interesting point as well, because it is, so data centers' main cost is cooling. So you got the initial setup of a data center, but the ongoing cost is always to keep it cool because they're incredibly hot, right?
Mm.
And the reason these places are built in large flat lands, so thinking like desert, that type of sort of material, which of course is extra cost to keep it cool. So if you're looking at a company or wealth company and looking at the data they hold, obviously they're going to have the generic things like transactions, customer name, and all that sort of stuff that they have to hold. But then you've got all the other things that they might hold that they might not realize they're holding to a certain extent, things like IP addresses, last login dates, location data. If they're not using that stuff, then there's a cost to it. And the downside of a cloud enabled business is the same as the upside, is that if the agreement's there with the vendor, it will just increase the size and the available space to you. On the flip side of that, you might not realize that you're holding all this data if you don't have a process there or a team there to manage it effectively. If you're just ever increasing the size, sort of your allocation at that data center, then you don't know that your data hoarding effectively is going out of control.
That's really interesting, Rich, isn't it? Because I guess, is it almost perversely too easy now just to store more and more data? Because you just go to your cloud provider and say, I'll go up the next tier, the next bracket of my agreement with you, and I'll take more data, rather than in the past having to physically buy infrastructure. And before you did that, someone perhaps going, actually, we could probably create some space, we could probably purge some existing data that we don't need anymore. Is it almost too easy now?
Yeah, but I think this comes back to the original point that we mentioned at the beginning around the actual management of the data, in terms of, is it too easy, like you said, to just keep going and understanding? But at what point do we become more stringent with our data and say, is this really required to keep this data?
Yeah, and absolutely. And do you feel that firms understand the environmental impact of increasing their data storage, something so seemingly simple to do? Are they understanding what the knock-on implications of this is kind of over and above the cost element?
I would be surprised. I've never seen anything presented by Amazon or anything like that says, okay, your 10 gigabyte of storage that you're using, you get a cost, like you just said. That's easy. They've never given me my CO2 number to how much, actually, if I filled that up, how much CO2 am I raising here? How much cooling do you have to use because that's an extra hard drive that you've got to install and keep cool. I've never seen that. I don't know if that's ever really shared from these sort of big providers. I have no doubt they have MI and numbers on it. They must do. But I've never seen it shared by them in terms of the environmental impact of that data, just the cost.
And it flows through, doesn't it, I guess, because we all work on change initiatives. What we do at Simplify, we help our customers deliver change. And I guess one of the factors that we should see more and more is when we're launching a new product or building a new technology solution, or increasing the number of the access to distribution, etc. That's all going to result in increased data requirements. And at some point, there should be some assessment of actually what do we need to store, how long do we need to store it for, what's the policy going to be around retention, and what we can do to mitigate the footprint of that data upon kind of our overall ESG credentials. So I think we'll start to see more and more of that with some of our clients, and it's going to be a theme going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of continuing with that going forward as well, a lot of firms have obviously made that transition from on-site storage to cloud storage. What comes next? And that's probably just an open question to the three of you. Do you think AWS and co are thinking about alternative, more sustainable, user-friendly storage solutions? Rich, you're nodding your head.
Yeah,
you might have an idea.
Well, Microsoft did an experiment. I think it's probably 2 years ago now, where they built a data center but underwater, off the coast off Scotland. Massive container, obviously sealed tight, and they literally just dunked it under to keep it cool, and that was it. That was how it kept cool. It was passive. It was just sat in the water doing its thing. No air condition, obviously, nothing of that, and it worked. Obviously, that is a massive cost save to them. That whole operation to build that room, if you will, and to service it is no doubt more. But not paying for cooling is the ultimate aim of the big three. Is just it's unbelievable the amount of money they spend on air conditioning just to keep these units cool.
I completely second to what Richard said there. I think that the next course of action is to sort of attack the sustainability side of it, and understand where environmental benefits can come into their own with what Microsoft have done. I read a stat the other day which said 2% of the world's total energy usage is now used in data centers. So, it puts into scope how much is being used currently. So there's obviously major room for improvement from all providers to sort of really nail down that sustainability aspect.
And as this becomes more of a topic of conversation, I think it will shine a light on those businesses as well. It will become part of their own sustainability measures and metrics and policy. And that can only be a good thing, really. We're talking about this openly, and customers have a plan. Clients and big businesses have a plan to deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely. And Carl, in terms of looking at wealth in particular, what direction do you see cloud taking over the coming years in our industry?
I just think that most of our clients have probably already developed cloud capabilities. Some are moving towards it still. There's still conversations, and still actually some of the technology solutions out there are on-premise solutions. They are data center oriented in an individual client's server room or whatever it might be, and installed locally. So the transition is still happening. That will continue as kind of the confidence in cloud continues as well. But I think definitely the focus around the ESG and the impact of data storage, Tom's stat is really, really interesting. Kind of 2% of the energy usage is down to data centers. It's the sort of thing people are going to start challenging, because as we look at our kind of climate emissions and how we are impacting upon the environment, as we start to address some of the easy things, we're going to start looking at some of the harder things and how we address those. And inevitably, that 2% is a big number. And there's a huge opportunity for wealth businesses to really challenge themselves around data storage and data usage, not only aligned to GDPR and other regulations, but just generally in terms of what they're using that information for, and how it's going to help them drive their business in the future. So I think we'll start to see it in a lot of the initiatives that we work on. We'll be talking to our clients about it as well. and then inevitably be some changes as a result in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, this is open to everyone now. In terms of what companies can do to ensure that they've got the right storage solution at the moment, that might be from choosing the right provider to actually, do we sit tight and see what's going to happen in the future? What are your thoughts on that?
I think for me, it would be interesting if people started questioning not just the cost of data storage online, because ultimately that's what it comes down to at the moment, I think. And it'd be interesting to see if there is room for a competitor or one of the big three to change, to actually, you know what, make it more efficient, make it more environmental friendly, but maybe charge a bit more for that, because that's ultimately what it's going to come down to. And it'd be interesting to see if clients would go for that from an ESG point of view, from just a general responsibility point of view. Are they willing to pay a bit more for that cleaner data effectively? That to me would be quite interesting to see, and sort of watch the market, because that's how these big three are going to change, is if their clients put pressure on them to look into other options.
And from just seconding that again, Rich, from a wealth and finance UK perspective, this is all going to come under scope of UK scope 3 emissions soon. So, these large wealth and finance firms are going to have to actually start commenting on this soon, and it won't be something that maybe in the past has been pushed under the rug.
Yeah, agree.
It'd be interesting to see if that encourages anything back to some more local data centers as well. Because if people, if the UK businesses in this case are responsible for that number and for those emissions, and they can't get that out of the big three, will that push them maybe towards a more local data center, which they can control and they can, regulate and basically keep an eye on in terms of emissions point of view.
Okay, fantastic. Well, obviously, thank you very much to our attendees, Tom, Rich, and Carl, and for all your contributions today. Thank you very much for our audience for listening. If you'd like a further chat with us around data storage and how we can assist you going forward, please visit www.simplifyconsulting.co.uk. Thank you.